I feel like to say my own design is a little bit, I don't know, that sounds a little faffy. I am not allowing myself to cast on something new. It's all gonna work out. I think it's gonna be great. I have a garbage bag of yarn. This is my baby right here. I'm in love.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and this is OC, and you're watching also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for coming to join us today. We've got another podcast episode for you, and Miss OC has not made an appearance in a little bit. She was just drinking some water and thought she might want to say hi. Yeah, you're gonna take a nap while I talk? Yeah. All right. Like I said, I'm Nora. I'm coming to you from a small farm in Connecticut, and I've got to tell you guys, it is warming up here. So we've got water with us today. I've tried to pull the shades down a little bit to keep the sun from coming in. I don't know how obvious it's going to be, but I'm getting pretty toasty sitting here, and I hope that we could just kind of stay cool while we chat. And yeah, I'm excited. I've got my whips to tell you about today. Still no finished objects, a few acquisitions, and I've got some refined plans. So I'm really excited to tell you about all of that. I think we should just go ahead and dive on in. As per usual, I would like to start with the project that's been on my needles the longest, and that's going to be the Sand Cardigan by Maria Isaieva of Ulan Knitwear. It is a nearly floor-length cardigan that I am knitting out of Nora Madara in the colorway 01 Sake. And it's been 94 days since I cast this one on. So let's take a peek and chat about it a little bit. Here we have it. I know things are going to start getting really tricky to show with this one, but this is how much of a cardigan we have so far. If I flip around to our progress keeper back here, it looks like I've made about 1.5 inches of progress since last week. I really did think I was going to be working on this one a little bit more over the past week, as this is what I prefer to knit on while we're watching some soccer. And we actually had 2 games to watch this past week as opposed to the one that we usually have. But it turned out that the second game we had to watch was on a work day, and I was exhausted. So I could not even bring myself to knit while watching the game. So this really did only get sort of a day of work. So let me move the progress keeper. And while I do, I'll just give you a quick rundown of the stats. So I'm knitting this in the size 5 on, I'll never remember, 4.5 millimeter needles. And yeah, right now we're in the home stretch of getting the body done. So I'll be knitting on this for a good little bit before I even have to check in with the pattern again. But I did want to see, I believe that when I purchased this yarn, I'm pretty sure that I bought 12 skeins. So I was curious to see just how much I had used so far, and I needed to wind up a new ball the other day. So I was able to do some quick math, and I've got 4, 5, 6 untapped into skeins right now, and then we're working on this 7th ball here. So as of right now, actually worked into this cardigan is just over 5 skeins of this yarn. So when I went to go wind up my ball the other day, I wound up a total of 3 of them. So this one plus 2 more. And we'll see how many then of the leftover 4 that I haven't tapped into yet I wind up using. I think I'm going to have some left over, but realistically what I still have to do is obviously the full rest of the body, which right here is the bottom of the pocket. So that sits kind of just under my hips. And I'm going to knit this about down to my ankles. Then I still have to finish out the sleeves, and then of course the whole thing gets a double knit button band. So I'm not really sure if this used up 5 so far. I can imagine maybe just using an additional 5, so probably having 2 skeins left over is my like more reasonable guesstimation. But yeah, so that's where this is at. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the plans. But one thing that I wanted to ask you today, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember now where I had seen it, but I saw someone talking about when it comes to a double knit button band. Typically, and I've only done one before, but what I've done in the past is you go through and pick up all of the stitches around the button band. And being that this is going to be literally from ankle to back of neck down to ankle, that's going to be a heck of a lot of stitches. And then I saw someone talking about being able to do a double knit button band in such a way that you don't have to start with picking up stitches. If this is something that you have experience with or advice on, or you got any information to share about that, please let me know. Because I feel like if there was ever a project that warranted not having to pick up stitches, it would be this situation. So please let me know if you have any insight on a double knit button band where you don't have to start by picking up stitches. Let me know what you got. Otherwise, like I said, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the plans, but for now, she's been on the needles for 94 days. And yeah, that's a sand cardigan. Up next, we have my Florence tank by Sorry Nordlands, which I am knitting as part of my own knit along stash bust spring. So I am busting a little stash by knitting this project, and I am using a thrifted cone of yarn. Now, up until this point, I have been saying that it is a mystery cone because all I had was the sticker that said DK Cashmerino Verde Musco. And one of you messaged me the other day, and I'm going to pull up the information that she found. This was so funny because I got this message and she's like, I think I figured out what the mystery fiber is. And she was shopping on Color Mart and saw like the same colorway and it said Verde Musco. So I went and I checked it out, and I believe that we have figured this out. So when looking this up on Ravelry, sorry, I'm just reading this off of my phone, but the Ravelry link says from Color Mart, Cashmere Merino 2/6NM 5/95 bulky wool DK weight. And then it says, it clarifies, bulky wool is a brand name and not a yarn weight. It's a DK. And it comes in the colorway Verde Musco. But it says on here that the fiber makeup is 95% wool, merino, 5% goat, cashmere goat. And looking at the yarn on the Ravelry listing, it does look very similar to my yarn, even down to the point where it almost has this frothy look about it that sort of describes that like felted feeling that I've been experiencing. And when I look up the Verde Musco colorway, it really does look the same. So I think we may have cracked the code on the mystery cone yarn, which if that's the case, it's just so good to know what fibers we're working with here. And I had suspected it was a cashmere merino blend, as it did say that on the label. But I would have no way of knowing exactly what makeup it is or if that was the extent of the fibers. I thought that there was maybe a chance that there was some acrylic or something else like that mixed in. But I do think we've figured this out. So I just want to say a big thank you to you who actually messaged me, but also just another cool reminder that this community is awesome. And I invite you to utilize the comments if you have a similar situation where you're like trying to find something out and you think just more eyes on it could be helpful. Please feel free to utilize the comments for something like that because it's moments like this where you realize that the reach just goes on and it's crazy cool that someone else was able to identify that for me. So excited to figure that out. Thank you again. Now, back to the project, the Florence tank. This has now been on my needles for 31 days. I'm also knitting this in the size 5, and this I am knitting on, I believe, 4mm needles, right? 3.75 millimeter needles. Here we go. This is where we're at so far. Last week I was talking about how the stitch definition was just like a little bit disappointing. And you guys are so nice. Everyone was telling me not to overthink it until it's been totally blocked. And you're right. I did block my swatch where I saw for the first time. I felt like the stitch definition wasn't great, but my thought process was maybe just in a smaller scale, it's kind of not so clear. And once you see the full lace pattern across a full garment, it will really sing then. And then working this up, I'm like, maybe it's not, but you're right. I need to block it and we'll see then. Now, that being said, this I have not yet like tried on anything. It is bottom up and so it's not exactly something I could just toss over my head and try on. However, today I did want to get this onto some try on tubing because I have never been able to stretch it out to its full extent while it's been on the needles. And we are approaching the point where I have to split for the underarm. And boy, am I glad to be doing so. So real quick, let's check out the progress keeper is right here. I was able over the past week, my goal is to complete 1 lace repeat a week. And I was able to do just over like 1.5 of the lace repeat, just under 2 repeats really. So here's my progress keeper. And this is the amount I was able to do. Let us move that. And I am wearing a white t-shirt today because I really wanted to be able to see this around me and see that lace kind of coming up against the white shirt. So let me grab some try-it-on tubing and we can try this on together. Yes, I just hit myself in the face. Let me make sure I have more than enough. This should be linked in my description box below, but I just bought a big roll of this on Amazon way back and I still have yet to go through all of it. I tend to just cut off amounts and then I don't know where they wind up. I lose them around the house. Okay. We have got, not hit myself in the face again. We have got our length of try-it-on tubing. I have some things to talk about while I move this over. So let's go ahead and start some try-it-on tubing and chat. So this has been on the needles for 31 days. And when you think about the fact that this is just a tank top, I mean, it has no sleeves. There's absolutely no reason why it should be taking, well, there is. But it doesn't feel like it should take as long as it's been taking. And that's because it is all over lace. And when I cast it on, I really did want something that was going to kind of fly off the needles. And this just hasn't been that. And generally, I'm okay with that. I mean, look at the sand cardigan. That certainly is not flying off the needles. Also, since this is lace, I'm going to be so careful in moving these stitches over because I will have a full meltdown if we drop any stitches right now. So yeah, in general, in practice, I do not have a problem with long-term whips. It genuinely does not bother me. But because I went into this one hoping for it to be a short-term whip, I'm like, girl, it's been a month. So that's just a little bit frustrating. But I also accepted that at some point, and that was why I wound up casting on my stripe hype sweater. And and just having something to scratch that itch of something a little bit quicker. But also, I think I've decided I love the look of lace. I don't know that it's for me. I have found peace in knitting this, and I am content with the process. And I'm proud of myself for finding a process that works for me to knit lace. But I just don't think that my brain and I mutually are that crazy about it. And I hate saying that, actually. I don't find the skill of knitting lace to be particularly difficult, but I also just don't find it that enjoyable. Whereas, like, knitting cables, I love. I'll knit cables all day, every day. I find that to be very enjoyable, even though it's a brain tickler, like lace is. So I'm not sure what it is about the lace. Maybe it's the fact that in cable knitting, when you cross that cable and you're physically knitting the cable, I find that to just be very satisfying and sort of instant gratification. Whereas when you're knitting lace, like, the stitches on the needle themselves, they look like nothing. They look jumbly and strange, and it's not until you have a few rows worked up that you can really enjoy and appreciate them. Am I the only one who feels that way? So the end result, love, beautiful. How nice is that? But the in the moment process, I'm not crazy about. And maybe that says something about me as a person. Like, I enjoy some instant gratification. But I think that's just sort of where I stand. Now, I also think that it's possible that different lace motifs I'll feel differently about, because if you remember when I had knit the Lily Kate France Nettie scarf, that is all over lace, but it's all over eyelets. And maybe it's because I found that to be more rhythmic. I was able to enjoy that process a bit more. I really actually loved knitting that. I found it to be almost addicting. Whereas this is a 10-row lace repeat, and yeah, you're doing something different every single row. And so what I found too is that I really have to sit down and carve out some time to work on this, which I'm fine with. That's why I've made the goal of only doing one repeat in a week. But what I don't love is finding like 20 minutes today to get a couple rows in, and then 20 minutes another day to get a couple rows in. And that's really the easiest way for me to carve out time to sit and focus on knitting this. Whereas if I just sit down and get 10 rows done in one like couple hour long sitting, that's better for me. My mind stays in it, and I feel like it becomes more rhythmic. So basically what had happened was, from last podcast to this podcast, I had not touched this until yesterday. And at that point, the like whole rhythm of it sort of left my brain, and I was developing like an anxiety about picking it back up, because I was like, oh, I'm not going to remember how to do anything. And so I felt like I was like, oh, I don't know that I'm loving this project anymore. But at the same time, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I want it. I want to own this. So what I decided to do was, yesterday, I only worked on this. I sat outside, which I love. Thank you so much to those of you who are tagging me on Instagram in your outdoor setups. I love to see you guys outside knitting. Go get some fresh air, enjoy yourself out there, bring something to drink outside, and just get a few rows in. I promise you it will change your day. But yeah, I sat outside and I knit on this a good bit. And I think what I've decided is that because I'm kind of not in the mood to work on it, I'm going to try to sort of like hyper focus on it, because if I do that, then I enjoy the process more, just like getting into the groove, getting into the rhythm of knitting it versus doing 20 minutes today, coming back another day, 20 minutes then, forgetting what I've done in the past week and having to sort of reaccustom myself with the chart. And I don't know, there's just something about that pick up and put down with this one that I'm not crazy about. So I'm feeling like the best way for me to get this done, and we're so close realistically, is to get as much progress done on this as soon as possible while my head is still really in it, before I sort of let myself think too much about other things. And I think that because of that, when we get to plans, I'm going to kind of touch on that idea again, because I think it's changed the trajectory for the projects I have right now a little bit. So I'll come back to that thought later, but yeah, I just had that epiphany the other day where I was like, I don't think I like doing this in small increments. I'd rather just sit down and get a big chunk done. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, now let's see if it even fits. We're off the needles. We're on the try-it-on tubing. And so let us go ahead and end the try-it-on tubing and chat. I believe that in the pattern, Sari says to knit from the bottom edge to the underarm about 13.5 inches. I think that's what it said. And right now, before I try this on, let's just see where we're at. So we're at about 10 inches. So perfect timing, I think, to try this on to confirm those numbers. If I try that on, I mean, I'm going to stand up and hold this around my body like a towel when you get out of the shower. All right, let me get back here. Man, I don't think I could have been more like bang on with the sizing of this. I did do a gauge swatch, so I shouldn't actually be surprised, but I am a little bit, I won't lie. All right, so let's see. I also kind of have to decide exactly how I would like to wear this, which my thought is I think I should maybe compare it to the length of a few other like sort of similar fitting tank tops or vests that I own, and just get an idea of like how much space there is under the arm to the hem on those versus this. Let me try to finagle it. There we go. The fit is perfection. Man, that's awesome, because I mean, it's fitting almost just like exactly right now. And so with blocking, I should just get a bit more positive ease, and it should be a little bit more almost like my t-shirt fits. But let's say I do actually like the length of this t-shirt. It's kind of not quite long, but it's also not cropped. So kind of holding this up against that, we can see, I think she's exactly right with 13.5 inches, because I would really like for this, it's actually coming to like the bottom of my bra band, I can feel, and I'd like for it to obviously cover the top of my bra band. So I should maybe just measure the width of that, and then that would probably be a good accurate measurement. I wore the white, so hopefully we can see the contrast coming through on the lace. But boy, is it getting there. And here's the thing too. Well, okay, let's just look at this for a second. So here we go. Sorry, my tubes are all in the way. Very cute. Well, that's exciting. For a moment, I was like, are we about to be so disappointed that I've put in all of this work and it doesn't even fit around my body? But it fits perfectly. So whew, rest assured. But yes, I'm like, what was I about to say? So once I get to the underarm, I feel like this is just going to breeze on by, right? Because as you work your way up, things are decreasing. I still haven't totally decided if I'm going to try and modify the back of this pattern to be more of a V-neck than a straight across. What I've basically just decided is that as I get to that point in the pattern, I will kind of see what it says and figure out, like, as I go, if that's something that I'm willing to take on or if it seems feasible enough. But right now, man, I'm very happy. And actually, all right, everyone who is telling me to hang on till I block it, seeing it even just more stretched out on the try-it-on tubing, I can see the lace a bit more and appreciate it a little bit more. It's been a lot of work, guys. Like, I know that this is just a giant rectangle right now, but this has taken a lot of time, a lot of brain power. But I'm really excited to have it. So, oh man, I'm just glad that it fits. Anyway, that's where we're at. I'm glad that I took the time to try that on today. And yeah, I will come back to that again also in the plans. So let's put this one away, but that's the Florence tank by Sari Nordland, and it's been on the needles for 31 days. The final whip I'm going to be chatting about today is my stripe hype sweater by Veronica Lindberg of Kutoba Kika. And this is also part of Stash Bust Spring for me. So I am using Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool as the main color and the colorway oatmeal, and then assorted nature spun wool in the contrast colors, with the exception of the dark gray stripes that you see across the middle of the body. That is Cascade 220 in the colorway Jet. This project has been on my needles for 24 days today. Last week, I did predict that as of filming today, I would probably be really close to finishing and just prepping to get it blocked for the next podcast. And I think that was accurate. So here we go. Sorry, things are looking a little bunchy and tangled right now. I'm pretty sure this is my favorite thing I've ever made. The colors are just so good to me. I love it. Let me talk about the things that I've definitely completed, and then I'll go back to what I started last week. For reference, I'm knitting this in the size extra large, and I've been knitting it on 4mm needles. Now, since we spoke, I have knit the collar as well as the cuffs. Those each include their little pop of contrast, which the one on the collar corresponds to the color on the bottom of the sleeves, and then the contrast on the cuffs corresponds to the first stripe sequence that you see. And I wasn't sure how I was going to incorporate the contrast color. I wound up just following the pattern verbatim, but what I actually tried to do first was you finish with an Italian bind off, and I've always done an Italian tubular bind off. So I've always done those setup rows prior to actually doing the sewn bind off. And I tried to do that first with the contrast color in those two setup rows, but the knit and the slip just doesn't work when you have the two different colors. So I wound up just doing a standard 2 rows in the contrast color and then the sewn bind off with the same contrast color. So if I'm not mistaken, that's just an Italian sewn bind off instead of a tubular bind off. But I think it looks great. To be honest, I can't actually even see a big difference between doing it this way and then doing the setup rows. So we'll see if I continue to not use setup rows in the future. I don't actually mind doing them, but I do feel like sometimes if you're not careful, it can cinch things in a bit. So anyway, I was able to do that. I've tried this on since. Everything fits exactly the way that I'd want it to. I had seen a few comments of people saying that on their own stripe pipes, they found that the neck was a little too tight for them. So I considered sizing up in the pickup rate, but I had that on my mind and then did my pickup, and I wound up with the exact amount of stitches it recommends for my size. Continued on with that. I think I may have cut mine just a little bit short because I didn't want a particularly like deep neck collar. So maybe that's why, but this actually fits over my head really nicely and still doesn't have a super cinched in. It almost actually sits like my t-shirt does, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want something that was stifling me. Now, last week I had started the twisted rib, which those were also done in twisted rib. I started the twisted rib on the front last week, and I was using the recommended needle size, which is a 3mm needle. And it was just unpleasant. I also really was getting quite a dense fabric. I mean, I think it looks really good, but it doesn't have the same sort of squishability as the rest of the sweater. So I tested out doing the cuffs and the collar with a 3.5mm needle, and that was much better and still gives a beautiful and clean look. So I guess also maybe the collar issue, I did use 3.5 versus a 3mm needle. So this fits great. Maybe that's why. Anyway, I haven't had the heart yet to rip out the ribbing that I started on the front, so that's going to be the last thing that I do. As of right now, I have just started the ribbing on the back. So again, this is twisted rib. I have made a modification to my own sweater that I'm doing a split hem, so that's not part of the pattern. And to keep the edges nice and clean when I'm on the wrong side and I'm starting with a purl, I slip my purl and then just proceed as normal, slip the last purl, and then on the right side, I just knit that stitch normally. I'm not doing a twisted stitch for that one. I don't know if that would make a difference, but that's what I've been doing. So I've maybe got 1.5 inches of ribbing on the back, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be going for about 5 inches of ribbing on the back and then about 3.5 on the front. So the 3.5mm needle is way more comfortable than the 3mm was, but the back and forth of this versus like the cuffs and the collar were so easy. This has just been a slog. However, I am going to try and get that done because I'm really excited. It is still at this point here in Connecticut kind of getting chillier at night, and I found myself just reaching for and throwing on a sweater as the evening kind of gets a little cooler if we're sitting outside again. And so I would really love to have this for those chillier evenings. I'm so excited you guys are loving this. And I definitely think that at some point, with the amount of you who have been interested in knitting this, I'm sensing a knit along in our future because I need about 10 more of them. So super excited. I think by next week, we should have this good and blocked. And I'm still planning on doing, though the pattern does not have a pop of color on the hem like it does on the collar and the cuffs, I'm planning to just use up a little bit more of that charcoal gray yarn as a pop of color on the end of the hem. And I just think that that's going to kind of ground things because it will be quite a bit of the oatmeal at that point when it's 5 inches long. So I think that the charcoal will really just keep things nice and grounded and then a little bit more cohesive too. I'm so excited about it. This is my baby right here. I'm in love. And like I said, extra large sweater in 24 days of knitting and it's almost done. Couldn't be more thrilled. Literally, I've run out of good things to say because it's just that good. Now, I said I have some acquisitions and I'm going to tell you about those. I'm going to just flip-flop the order. I usually go in here a little bit because I want to talk plans for a second. So you may have noticed that I did not talk about my messy dressy today, which is the crochet dress that I am working on. It's my own. I feel like to say my own design is a little bit, I don't know, that sounds a little faffy, but it is. And I didn't work on that this week. Here's my thought right now. We are actually, I think that the game that I'm planning to wear that dress to might be exactly a month from today. So, the thought process here for plans is stripe hype will be done by next week. I'm going to do my best to work on that sort of at night and just a little bit more pick up put down, since it is just in that twisted rib and it's going to be a little workout on my hands. But I think it's realistic to say that I could get that done and blocked by the next time I sit down to film. Main attention is going to go to the Florence tank. I'd love to get that off the needles for the following week. So hopefully next podcast we'll be done with the stripe hype, and then hopefully for the podcast after that we'll be done with the Florence tank. At that point, I will be down to the sand cardigan and the messy dressy. Both projects that I would also like to and have to wrap up. So I am not allowing myself to cast on something new until either the sand cardigan or the messy dressy are done. So yes, once the stripe hype and the Florence tank are off the needles, the sand cardigan is going to come out of its strictly soccer knitting and that will become just my more sort of mindless knit. And that's okay with me because we're getting to a point where I'm like, I'm ready to have this. I actually just over the weekend was working and I felt like the purpose of me making this cardigan is to have something to throw on the early mornings when I'm heading out to work and it's still chilly out, like before the sun comes up. And I was so angry that I didn't have it yet because I wanted to wear it over the weekend. So I am happy to kind of move that into the forefront a little bit more in focused knitting. So that's the way that I'm kind of planning to shuffle things around. And so basically, once the Florence tank and the stripe hype, or just even one of them is off the needles, I'm going to have a lot more time to dedicate to crocheting up my squares for the messy dressy. And like I said with that one, if it has to turn into a short dress, that's okay with me. I have a vision of it being a long dress, but I'm shooting for a short dress first. So I think that that's still pretty feasible. So yeah, those are the tentative plans as far as getting these projects off the needles and just rearranging the way that I'm working on them. Now I'm running the Knit Along Stash Bust Spring until June 21st. And I would love to get one more project at least on my needles before that date. But it's really going to depend on the messy dressy, which is also a Stash Bust Spring project. But I definitely am feeling like my spring plans were very ambitious. So it'd be cool to get another one of those projects on the needles, but I won't beat myself up about it if I don't. So that is what I'm thinking for plans. I also just really don't like having this many whips at the same time, which I know about myself, but I got excited to add the messy dressy. So I definitely feel like we need to whittle things down. And it will all become a little less redundant if I don't have two mindless knits on the needles at the same time, which right now is the sand cardigan and the stripe hype. So I'm happy to have just one of those on the needles, get that Florence tank done. It's all going to work out. I think it's going to be great. Now, again, always awkward every time I go from talking about Stash Bust Spring into acquisitions. However, I have mentioned before that a local yarn shop has been going out of business. And so they've had some serious discounts on the yarn and supplies that they're just trying to get rid of before they close. And this past week was the last week that they were open. So I decided to just take one more trip over there. And I did pick up some more yarn. I I'll tell you how much I spent in the end and how much I saved, but I purchased 3 sweaters quantities of yarn as well as 4 sweaters quantities of buttons and then 1 little doohickey. And I have to say, so I've never been someone I mean, I've only been knitting for a year and a half, but in my time knitting, I've never been someone to just buy yarn for the sake of buying yarn. I've almost always, unless it was thrifted, I've almost always just purchased yarn when I'm ready to make a project. Or last year, I kind of made a list of projects I was planning to make. They were in the queue, and I did like a bulk order purchase online so that I could get free shipping. But I worked through all of that yarn consecutively after that. So this has just been a really interesting opportunity when else are you getting deals like the ones that you get when a yarn shop closes? And of course, I also just want to support that yarn shop on their way out, and they're just trying to sell everything. So that has been it's tempting. However, I've gone to the yarn shop now 3 times since they announced that they were closing. And each time I've been in there for like 2 hours, and it's a small yarn shop. But I'm sitting there and I've been so diligent about looking at the yarn that they have, finding a color I like. Do they have it all in the same lot? Do they have enough for me to make a project? What project do I think I want to make with it? And I've been sitting there and actually physically going through Ravelry and pairing the yarn that I like with at least one project so that I can get a good sweaters quantity. That's what I do. I knit garments. And if I am to knit an accessory, I'm not usually purchasing yarn for that. That's going to be more with like leftover or more thrifted yarns. So that's been the way that I've been sort of doing this since the first time I went into the shop. I also would write down like, okay, I noticed a sweater's quantity of this yarn, and I'd put that in my phone, and so that I could come home and do a little more research on Ravelry and see sort of what I thought. So knowing that this was going to be my last time going to this yarn shop, I had a really clear head of what I wanted and exactly what I sort of needed, gaps I could fill. And I now have quite a few sweaters quantity of yarn in my stash. And I'm going to come up with a plan on how I can strategically work through that so that I don't just continue to grow the pile. That being said, over the course of the rest of this year, I have plans to purchase a few more sweaters quantities of yarn, but they're with specific projects in mind that I've been thinking about for a while now. And with the exception of those few projects, I'm planning to work strictly from stash. So not justifying my purchases, just sort of telling you where my head is at, because I've never been a stash person outside of thrifted yarn. But again, we're back to this all had thrift vibes about it, so I'm sure you can understand. With all that out of the way, let's just check out this yarn. It's funny because they actually are running out of bags. So this is what they gave me the yarn in. I have a garbage bag of yarn. So 3 different sweaters quantities. I will start with, this is actually the Juniper Moon Patagonia Organic Merino yarn, which I purchased the first time I was in the shop in that pearl colorway. And I've just been enjoying the feel of this. And this color I had been eyeing since I went into that yarn shop the first time, but I didn't know if it was maybe a touch redundant considering the fact that I have my original Corsaven cardigan in this similar sort of mauve-y borderline. That one is a little more terracotta than it is plummy. And this is a beautiful sort of plum rose colorway. It's called Rose, and everything's in the bag. I'm not going to take it all out. So I have a sweater's quantity of this, but it's really beautiful. I've been eyeing it, like I said, since the first time I was in there. And since it was still there in a sweater's quantity for me, I decided to pick it up. I have a few plans for this, but they're very wishy-washy. Don't have anything set in stone. So if you have an idea for this colorway, I think I'd like a pullover since I already have a cardigan in a very similar colorway. So I think that a pullover will be better for this one, but really adore this color. Yeah, so that's the Juniper Moon Farm Organic Merino. Then I got some Barocco Ultra Wool 100% superwash wool in this stunning, very like a dark chocolate colorway. It's a really beautiful color. Does it say the color? It's color 33115. Does not have a colorway listed on it, but this is a little bit chunkier. That was, I think it's a sport weight, the Juniper Moon yarn. This is 100 grams to 200 meters. And I think I'd like to knit up a cardigan out of this yarn since I don't have any cardigans in this darker color. And I just think it's a beautiful neutral. It's very, what's the word? Yeah, very dark chocolate, I think is actually a really accurate representation of it. So super excited to have found that. Then last but not least, I got the Barocco Ultra Wool Chunky. So just the chunkier version of what I just showed you. This is 100 grams to 133 meters. And this I have an exact plan for that I'm so excited about because it's actually a sweater I have been eyeing for a while, but because it's knit up in a more chunky yarn, I just felt like I couldn't justify the price tag that would come along with that since you need more to fill out a whole sweater. This color is very sandy. If I hold it over here, I can see it in the natural light a little bit better. But I think that this really is the perfect grayish color. So somewhere between gray and beige. I'm going to hold it up against the oatmeal so you could see the warmer tones that this one has compared to the Fisherman's Wool oatmeal. Here is Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool Oatmeal, and this is a very warm gray. Here is the Barocco. It's called 43103. And you can tell that this is just a bit sandier. So this is more of a true sand color, where this definitely up against that looks very gray. So yeah, I already have a plan for this, but it's a really beautiful neutral color, and I'm excited to try this one out. So those are the 3 sweaters quantities that I got. Really excited to add those to my stash. Let me show you the buttons and then I'll give you a little breakdown of the price. Now, I said I got 4 sweaters quantities of buttons. Basically, I got 4 different styles of buttons and I got 6 of each of those buttons with the idea that the average cardigan takes like 5 to 6 buttons. And I'm just a button girly. So I was excited to snag these. I'll definitely just put in some close-ups, but I will start by talking about the black button that I grabbed, which is really interesting. These are all actually like a resin or a plastic. And this one I liked because it has one side that is textured. So I think it's supposed to look like a natural button, but it's way more lightweight. So that could come in handy. But also I do like these buttons where you have a side that's more interesting and then another side that's just plain. That way, when the time comes that I need a black button, I can decide which side I'd like to use for that. So that's the black one. Then I really loved the look of these gray and black buttons. They're a little bit smaller and they actually have almost this like wedge shape to them. They look more like a clay button or something, but again, I think that they are just a resin or a plastic. And those I think would be really beautiful on a gray cardigan or even a black cardigan or white. I just liked the variation in that one. So love that. Then I saw these sweet little sort of lighter brown faux tortoise shell buttons. Almost looks like when you've just poured some creamer in a coffee. And again, they're even smaller than the last ones. So those are just a nice classic. Then the last ones I picked up were interesting because they appear to have a sort of shell-like shape to them, but these are definitely plastic and from a mold. They still have like the markings of the back of the mold on them, but I loved the color of them. They would actually go really well with the sandy colored yarn I just showed you or the Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool and the oatmeal colorway. Anyway, Another just good, they were all very classic buttons I thought would be nice to have in my stash. So really excited to have those. And then last but not least, the doohickey that I got were just these little needle protectors from Clover. I really liked that for these ones, it's one piece that you can stick both needles inside of, so you don't have to keep track of two different little rubber things. And I just am always forgetting to pop these sorts of things back on my needles. So I'm trying to stash them around the house a little bit, which actually reminds me of one more sort of off-topic acquisition. I'll show you that in a second. These, I mean, I saw these at checkout and I was just like, yeah, sure, we'll give that a shot. So for a little breakdown, I've got my receipt here. Each of those buttons I showed you, I got 6 of them. So I purchased a total of 24 buttons plus the Clover doohickey. I purchased 5 of the Juniper Moon Patagonia Organic Merino in that rose colorway. I purchased a total of 18 balls of the Barocco wool. They were all the same price, so that was how they were categorized. I believe I have more of the chocolate brown than I do of the gray, or maybe they're the same. Anyway, that's a total of 23 individual skeins of yarn, 24 buttons, and 1 little doohickey. And I paid a total of $95.45. My total should have come out to something closer to $360. So for their final week, everything was 75% off. And that was why I picked up these yarns that I was sort of on the fence about when I went in when everything was 50% off. I figured for 75% off, I'm really excited to try out these yarns that typically I would not purchase at full price because that's just not where I tend to put my budget. So like I said, there's way more yarn here than I'm going to need for the rest of the year even, but I was very strategic in picking projects for each of these yarns and I'm really excited to play with them. Now, just one more kind of silly quick acquisition that I made over the past week. I found that I tend to make all over the house. I'm outside, I'm inside, I'm just all over the place. And I've had one little pair of scissors and it's been driving me crazy that I never have them on me or I put them in a bag and I don't remember which bag I put them in. So I wound up actually just picking up a bulk pack of these like kids scissors. I got the ones that have the little sheath on them so that I can't just like leave out some sharp scissors around. But I picked up a 24 pack of these things, which is way more than I needed, but they were on sale and I figured I've stashed them in every corner of the house, basically. I put one in the car. I've got one on like either side of the couch. There's one next to my bed, like all over. And it's been so nice. But also the kind of cool thing about these ones is that on the blade themselves, they have a little centimeter marking. It's 5 centimeters. And I thought that was just kind of whatever. I didn't care about that. But then I found myself knitting outside and I was actually working on the ribbing of the stripe hype sweater when I saw I was supposed to knit to, 3 centimeters or whatever it was. And I was like, oh, shoot, my tape measure is inside. I don't want to go get it. And I thought, wait a second, I have my little scissors with me though. So I used my little centimeters on the scissors. And I was like, this is the greatest purchase I've ever made. So yeah, I just got a bunch of these little kitty scissors and it was the greatest purchase I've ever made. So I thought I would just throw that out there. Kind of silly, but now I have one in each of my project bags, in my purse, everywhere. They're just everywhere. So yeah, some silly acquisitions were made, but I just have no control over the fact that a yarn shop is going to close down during Stash Bust Spring. And how can you pass up yarn that's 50 and 75% off? So I'm just glad that all the purchases I made, I did really, really consider. They're full of consideration and thought behind those purchases. So all of that yarn should make it into garments over the next year or two. It's a lot of yarn. So that's all I have. So sorry, was I talking like a mile a minute? I'm filming earlier than usual today, so I did just finish my coffee and I think it's hitting me. Anyway, I hope that you are enjoying your knitting this week. I would still love to know what you're working on for Stash Bus Spring, so definitely let us know in the comments. And I hope that you continue to get outside and get some knitting in out there. Anyway, if you liked this video, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and then ring the bell, you will be notified every time I post a new video. However, I do post a podcast style of video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. And with all that being said, big ol' thanks for watching. I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.